It would be very hard to use equity without having some basis of understanding as how it relates to the Bible, if that makes sense. There's no laziness attached to actually learning and fully cognizing equity. Like, it's just, this is not the path for people who want a quick fix. From the Black's Law summaries, it says right there that one of the remedies that you have available to you is equity.
In response to equity is dangerous, equity itself is not dangerous. It is powerful, right?
Exactly.
So
you don't want to mess around with this stuff. It's serious. Like, it's
yeah,
serious, but it's not dangerous. I would say that that's the difference.
I would just say make sure that you are truly going into it and seeing exactly what it is, what it's all about. Don't forget to do that due diligence. This is powerful stuff, and we wouldn't want to dissuade people from learning it. All right, we are here and we have a special treat planned for you, the viewer or listener. And I'm here with Aaron Johnstone, who's one of the advisors for the Freedom Studio. And we're going to do I guess you could call it a response video to a video by Brandon Joe Williams called Debunking. And then he goes on to say equity, SPC, five-star passport, and a bunch of other stuff. And then finally, sovereign citizen. So, anytime somebody uses that word or that phrase, you're in for some fun. Aaron, how are you today?
I'm doing excellent, David. Thank you. I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to this chat.
Yeah, it's going to be cool. Now, we're not going to play the video and do that kind of video response. What I did is I had one of my team members just kind of write out some bullet points about what some of the points he made about equity. And we're just going to discuss that. And the reason is because we obviously, well, it may not be obvious if you're new to us, but equity is a big part of what we teach at the Freedom Studio. So yeah, I'm going to pay attention. And but to give credit where credit is due, Brandon was actually the first. He's the one that brought all this stuff to my attention to the point where I actually started to pay attention. So I got to give him credit for that.
Yeah,
Aaron,
I too also took his contract killer course. I've most of the videos in that one, 2.0.
yep, yep. So Aaron, since this is the first time you're on one of our videos, why don't you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. So my name is Erin Johnstone. I am just outside of Vancouver in British Columbia. I live in the city called Maple Ridge. Um, I I'm trying to think of how I came across the Freedom Studio. I started with the Freedom Studio when you were still calling it conditionalacceptance.com. And at that point, I was looking for lots of different information from different sources. And like I said, I too was watching Brandon Joe Williams's videos, and I follow Cal Washington and a few other groups. And yeah, and so I just, as I started through my journey and watching you go from, conditionalacceptance.com into the Freedom Studio, and then, I believe you took the equity course that I took, but the series prior to me. And then I really, as I've learned the equity information that we've learned and the processes that we've learned, I really am in strong support of the Freedom Studio as far as what you offer, giving people high level information and education. And I think that's really important when we're looking at all of the information that's out there as far as, different processes and things like that. And so that's why I'm here. And I just am grateful to be part of your group, David.
Thanks, Aaron. That's awesome. And it's great to have you here and to create this video with you as well. And I know you've already met with a bunch of folks from our community in private consultation as well. So really appreciate that. So yeah, I thought it would be great also because you and I may have different perspectives on how we kind of approach each of these concepts. And look, I mean, these things are important. This kind of videos for the discerning viewer, someone who's very teachable and likes to look at things from different perspectives and not just take things at face value. So that's kind of how I look at it. I mean, I'm probably going to end up agreeing with some of the things that Brandon brings forth and probably disagreeing with others. So yeah, it should be fun. All right, Aaron, you ready to jump in?
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. So And there's no rush. We can kind of take a look at each point, but I would say the first point that was brought forth, which was pretty early on, was this idea that equity is dangerous. And then my team member, she clarified that she thought what he meant by that is it's dangerous because of extreme ignorance around it. So before I give my answer, Aaron, what do you think?
Well, I think that, in any of these processes that people are choosing to do, there's always an element of, if they're doing things correctly or incorrectly, and, what the outcomes or consequences from those things could be. And, as, when we look at, when you're dealing with certain situations, and, especially to do with court and charges and things like that, you definitely want to be following the route that's going to give you the remedy that you're looking for.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I actually agree it can be dangerous if you kind of approach it half-ass or, just how quickly can I throw something together just because I'm trying to get a quick fix to something, just like a lot of things in life. So I would agree with that. It can be dangerous if used in that way. I mean, it could potentially make your situation worse. And it's also partly because it's tr a bit tricky. This is why, it takes time to learn because there's a lot of nuance to it. And one of the biggest things you'll probably hear me and Aaron and others say this over and over again, it's a process that you don't want to mix with other processes. It's meant to be pure. And that
Yeah.
actually can is part of the reason why I think a lot of people struggle in at least in the beginning, because
Because they're
it's
mixing it up with other processes that they've learned, and yeah, and then they have to get out of that stuff before they can move into the equity. Yeah.
yeah, and if you're very vested in litigation, it's gonna be a struggle to see the value of this approach. It's just very different. But I think it does still, I mean, you have to decide what your objective is. If you just want to be left alone, if you want to get out from under the yoke of the public side, but still be a powerful influence in the world, but still do great things. And in other words, not diminish your power, but take your power away from the public side, take your power back. It's going to be, in my opinion, way more powerful than litigation, for example, or
Well, and
introducing controversy.
introducing controversy, yeah, and the other thing is we've learned that equity, it favors the defendant and not the plaintiff. So when you're going
Yeah,
into that court situation, if you're going in with guns a-blazing and then you're trying to step into equity, where you're already filing, quoting their UCC codes, you're creating controversy. That's what the court system is looking for. That's what they feed off of.
exactly. I've often said, and again, if you ask someone else, they may give you a different opinion. But for me, and Aaron, I think you've probably heard me say this, it's mostly about your mindset.
Hmm.
It's mostly about your mindset. And that's why we hammer so much at the Freedom Studio. Like, what are you actually looking to get out of this? What do you want to create? What kind of world do you want to live in?
And
And
oftentimes people
yeah,
don't have that answer. They're coming in, thinking that they can do a certain thing, and then they're using a process that they don't really know in the end, how to actually get the remedy. Like, for example, if you read a book and it says, do this paperwork or submit this, or, and then, they're kind of going, well, I did all that stuff, but it's not working. Now what? Right. And then so it's kind of like, you know, you would hope that the people that are teaching this stuff are able to give that, student or the person learning what that end result is or how they can get their remedy. But what I've seen in my experience, and you can comment about yours, David, is oftentimes when, a person who's teaching has a student that's asking very pointed questions, they want very specific answers. And then these teachers are kind of backpedaling, they'll go to, even to being deduced right down to simple name calling, just because they're like, you don't understand this, you don't cognize it, or, they're just,
yeah,
and instead of actually offering the information, because if there is a remedy, or there's the end of that path that needs to be taught, so that that person does achieve the success that they were looking for, whatever they were looking at accomplishing, then that should be part of what they're teaching, right? So, but what I have found is, sometimes when people are doing these processes, they're just following blindly along. They don't know what the paperwork is that they're submitting, and then they get themselves in these, I call them like kind of dumpster fires, where now, stuff's being repossessed, they're looking at years in jail time and like, and all sorts of stuff. And then the people who are teaching them are just kind of like, oh, you're on your own. You didn't learn that well enough or something. And they're kind of like left like
So good luck
struggling
with
in this.
that.
Yeah, like, and so I think that that's where, like, for me, the importance, having listened to that video, like you said, there were points that he made that were true, but there were many that weren't true. And I think that comes just from, what his learning is and the limitations of what he has, learned and not learned as far as equity goes.
Yeah, and a year and a half ago, I didn't really know any of this stuff at all. I would not have been able to explain or articulate what equity is, other than just a very superficial kind of knowledge. So,
I didn't even know anything about
yeah.
equity until you started talking about equity. And then I was like, what is this equity? And I
What is
mean,
this
and
guy
that's, like
talking
I said,
about?
that's why I started, and then now I'm kind of like, of all the processes that you could choose to use, why wouldn't you use this one? It's so much more simplified. It offers
Yeah.
remedy if brought properly, and that kind of stuff, right? So I'm definitely on the equity train for sure.
So in response to equity is dangerous, equity itself is not dangerous. It is powerful. It is powerful, but it can be dangerous if used incorrectly or improperly or partially, without really fully, putting it to practice. Just like anything. I mean, driving a car, it could be very dangerous if you don't really know what you're doing, right?
Exactly.
So, but driving a car is not dangerous. I mean, yeah, maybe it is, but it's an acceptable level of danger for the convenience of moving yourself around. So that's kind of how I look at equity. It has a very powerful utility, maybe misunderstood, but just to categorically call it dangerous, as a way to kind of discourage study, that yeah, I can't see the value of that approach. So that's kind of my assessment.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So the next point that was brought up in the video is, and this is again not a direct quote from the video. This is kind of like a summary of what we understood. So some people now treat equity like a religion or cult, fiercely defending it without actually understanding what it is. Okay, so that's basically what he's saying in the video. Some people now treat equity like a religion or a cult, fiercely defending it without actually understanding what it is. So, what's your thoughts on that, Aaron?
Well, I think that, when I listened to the video, and he was making reference to some people's comments, and they were saying, you get the remedy in the private, and they're not really kind of being specific. It sort of leads people to believe like it's this mystical thing over here that you can't really see, and there's some element of that. There's some truth to that, because it's I'm unaware of, when people bring equity into the court system, there isn't a lot of case, as far as I know, and you could correct me, David. We don't see cases and case
Yeah,
precedents set with equity, because it is not something that they want you to be able to bring into that commercial realm. It's something that it is used to keep that court system honorable. And so, if they've got all these people out there learning how to stand up to that commercial system, which is basically keeping us enslaved, then, if everybody knew that this was a thing, then that court, I mean, that's a slow death for the court system. So you, one would understand that they don't want this out there as being, on the public record, as far as precedent being set in the courtroom.
for sure. We see that over and over again. But there's also the flip side to that, Aaron, that you and I have saw is that the judges kind of wink at you when they know that you
Mhm.
know. Like,
Or
so,
even
yeah.
like we've heard, like we heard some video stuff yesterday, and even in where the judges seem like they're not being honorable, they actually are in fact being honorable, and therefore, when you get your end judgment, that's okay. That's the end of what your court experience looks like, but then the remedy happens after that. So that's what's, I guess, would be hard for someone who's really heavily into litigation and looking at, like, case law, precedent, and other things like that. It's not comparable in those in that regard, anyways. And then the other thing about the religious component when he's talking about that, you know, when you look at different jurisdictions, and he does make a comment about how jurisdictions are, I can't remember his exact wording, but basically inferring that they're irrelevant. And that's not true. So if you have if jurisdictions are concentric and you have one that supersedes another one, if you can come into the courtroom in that higher jurisdiction, which is under God's law, like we are under God's law when we're in equity, when we're in natural law. Even ecclesiastical law is deeply rooted in Roman ecclesiastical. It traces back to the church. If you go and you look up that word, the court is under that system anyways. They have a Bible in the courtroom that you swear an oath to, even though it says in the Bible not to take oaths. There's lots of indications that it is tied to the Bible, which I would, present that to be the original covenant or the law book or the trust indenture instead of a religious text. But you can't, I shouldn't say you can't. It would be very hard to use equity without having some basis of understanding as how it relates to the Bible, if that makes sense. And I'm
100%.
not
And
super religious. I'm not super religious. I mean, I have my own relationship with God. I'm a very spiritual person, but the dogma and creed of religion is something that I don't. It's not part of what I follow.
I can relate to that, Aaron, because I've said many times on video that I don't consider myself religious at all, not even a little bit. But I'm not an atheist. I mean, I have a very deep spiritual connection. Hopefully that's should be pretty obvious, but maybe it isn't. I don't know. Not that I'm trying to make it obvious, but yeah, to me, it's never been about religion. And religion to me is kind of like, uh, uh, at the risk of offending a lot of people, it's like a closed belief system that's hermetically sealed in some way. And I think it's more important to be open to ideas. For example, I'm open that Brandon is correct about at least something that he's saying here, even though it kind of comes across like he's trying to take down equity. But hey, there's probably some good points here. So you don't want to ever be so close-minded that you're just like not going to see other perspectives.
Yeah, that gets
But
that gets us in trouble because then
yeah.
we're not open to continual learning, right?
Exactly. So to me, this statement, if we understood correctly what he was saying, this feels more just like an opinion. And but I do agree that I have seen people, I will just say I do agree in the sense that there is a certain number of people, I wouldn't even say it's the majority, but you run into them that it's like they just latch on to the next thing. So
Hmm.
in that sense, I agree. If you're gonna learn equity, just like anything proper in life, anything you want to master, it is important to, fully commit to learning it, study, putting it into practice. I mean, you don't go learn a profession and just, study for 2 weeks and think you've got it mastered. So with equity, it's the same thing. It's a life skill. And like you were saying, Aaron, people's livelihoods, people's property, their families, their assets are going to sometimes be in play. I would say almost
Or their
always.
body. If they want to
Yeah.
attach the charge to the physical body,
Yeah.
then good luck with that, right? Yeah. You know, I mean, you don't want to mess around with this stuff. It's serious. Like it's
Yeah.
serious, but it's not dangerous. I would say that that's the difference.
Exactly. It doesn't have to be a religion or a cult, but it does, definitely, I mean, it's great that people are speaking up in favor of these things. I would just say make sure that you are truly going into it and seeing exactly what it is, what it's all about. Don't forget to do that due diligence. But yeah, this is powerful stuff, and we wouldn't want to dissuade people from learning it. So the next point, let's see, people are saying that they're, quote, in the private um, because of equity. I guess interpreting a little bit of what he was saying, people saying they're in the private because of equity, and he characterized this as, quote, completely ridiculous. Okay, so kind of like, I guess the gist of that is people are claiming that they're private, but they're not. I guess if we wanted to really summarize that. So what do you think about that, Aaron?
Well, I mean, that's a pretty loaded statement because, I consider myself someone who, lives privately and, using equity allows me to have the ability to be left alone. But the reality is I have a birth certificate. So, I was registered, I mean, so can I really say I live in the private? No, because I have to interact with that commercial public system. If I have a driver's license, a passport, a mortgage, like anything that works, it works in that commercial realm. But when you have the basis of understanding to be able to interact with that commercial system in a way that is you allowing them to leave you alone, and then that is what allows you to live privately, because you have the ability to stop them from interfering in what is your personal matters. And like everything, there are always limitations to what we have as our tools to use. Um, but as far as the public and the private, I mean, unless a person is completely off grid, they are not interacting with that commercial system at all, they're living off the land. I mean, who is really truly private? That's what I would sort of ask.
Yeah, and I think it's also, again, it's this idea you can just throw on a label and say, oh, I'm private. But there's also the issue that public versus private can be interpreted a few different ways. Now,
Yeah.
the way I generally think about it is everything that is public is like happening in a fictitious world that, like the Monopoly board, where all the corporations, including persons, which is, you could say our fictional twin, the all caps name, but we're manipulating them from the private because as men and women, we are private inherently.
Hmm.
Okay, it's just we're interacting with the public. Now, in the private could also mean that you've moved most of your affairs to the private. So instead of
That's
operating a
true. Yeah,
company,
that's
you're
a good point.
operating a trust, right? Which is
Yep. Or a PMA or something like
right.
that. Definitely. Yep.
So commercially, you've moved your business to the private, and that is absolutely true. That you can't just say that you're private in that sense, and you are. You can say that you're private in the sense of being a man or woman, and not a fiction. But to say you're private and you haven't even set up your trusts or anything, or at least tried to set up some structure. No, I mean, yeah. So I mean, it just depends on how you interpret that. So it kind of goes back to speak this idea that whatever, at the risk of sounding a little repetitive, there is a way to make this happen, but you have to kind of go into the full process and learn it. So in this case, we'd be talking about trust, for example, working with private trusts together with equity and other tools in order to actually properly establish that. But I think, again, this is just my interpretation. There's probably a lot of people out there who are hungry for relief, who are even desperate in some way. Um,
Absolutely.
and I feel for them, and it sucks to be in a bad situation, but whatever you're going to accomplish in terms of creating more freedom, in terms of separating yourself and being sovereign, is going to take a significant amount of work and effort. So, and that's not meant to discourage anyone. It's absolutely the truth. What
Well,
do
and
you
that
think?
kind of goes back to, I think there was a point that he made about, the laziness or not wanting to learn it, or not wanting to learn the codes. And I can't remember exactly what he said, but I do not feel in any way that taking this path is the path of the lazy. Like, I feel, if anything,
Yeah.
it's like upped my intelligence, my knowledge, my like like source material learning, like to the next level. So I would disagree with the lazy factor. I feel like anytime you're learning something new, if it's like top level learning, you're in it to win it. I mean, you have to study, you have to learn, like, you know, I mean, like you say, I usually have a black sloth next to me. I was going to pick it up, but it's not here. I moved it. But like there's no laziness attached to actually learning and fully cognizing equity. Like, it's just this is not the path for people who want a quick fix.
Yeah, and I like the fact that I had forgotten that part of the video where I think he had mentioned, too lazy to study all the codes. See, lazy doesn't mean you're not lazy just because you don't study some particular topic, right? If you don't go deep into something. So I'm not lazy just because I haven't memorized the UCC, for example.
But
I
we don't need to memorize
yeah.
the UCC, and that's kind of that like that's a huge relief for me because I'm Canadian, so it's not even relevant for me in
Or
most
the
of the
bills of
cases. You know what I
exchange
mean?
or
Or the bills of
anything.
exchange. Obviously I've read the bills of exchange, but but I don't. I can know what allows me to interact with that system from the bills of exchange from a
Yeah.
standpoint of knowing where I stand, but I don't have to be quoting stuff from the bills of exchange in order to get a remedy.
Yeah, and this is the demonstration, Aaron, back to natural law that, intelligence is holistic and so is remedy. And so it's not just an intellectual exercise. You know, mastering deciphering the UCC is it's it's something for your left brain to chew on. It's like an intellectual exercise.
Hmm.
And that may have its merits, but the true remedy is holistic. And if there's a deeper layer that allows you, that still requires a lot of study, of course, but allows you to open up many more possibilities, that's not being lazy if you commit to that. In fact, quite the opposite. I would commend you for doing that.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. The timing was impeccable, right? Divine timing is always a thing.
Yeah.
Um, I'd missed a call last week where Cal Washington was talking specifically
Yeah.
about remedy. So I was listening to that this morning, and he always goes back to original source material, and I think he went to Black's Law summaries.
Okay.
He was referencing, and there was four points that it says that you can achieve remedy, and one of the points was equity. And I thought that was really cool because I was like, it was just this morning I listened to that and I was like, yeah. So yeah. So I mean, even from there, right, from the Black's Law summaries, it says right there that one of the remedies that you have available to you is equity.
And by the way, for folks who are curious, a great way to start studying equity, just to immediately kind of get a sense of its power, that's super accessible. You can access it right now. You don't have to become a member of our organization or any organization. You don't even have to buy a book. Just go to the internet and search the maxims of equity and just take a little time to study them. Don't rush, just kind of check them out, Some of you guys have probably seen the 10 maxims of commercial law, like basically law merchant maxims, ancient maxims, such as he who leaves the battlefield first loses by default. See, what makes it a maxim is it's based on absolute truth, objective truth that can't be refuted. However, there's also different ways to interpret and look at it. So it's not like everybody's going to see the exact same thing in it. So yeah, I would say for people who want to just kind of get a taste of what equity is about, just go check out the maxims online and see what you get out of that.
Definitely. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. And Aaron, I think you mentioned that you're working on some educational content to help teach those maxims. Is that right?
Yeah, that's my thing. I've started. I'm gonna really hammer down on it next week. I'm really looking forward to it because
Okay.
like when you're putting together material where you're trying to teach someone else or have them learn, it definitely takes that deeper level of your own internalization of that information. So each time, yeah, like I read the maxim and then you go to interpret it, you're looking at whether it's Burton's thesaurus, whether it's Black's Law Dictionary, where they're throughout there, or different sources. It really helps to give you a good basis of each one of those because, like Brandon Joe Williams says in his video, when you go into a court in equity, you're not going in where there's a jury. It's the judge, and you are at the judge's mercy of them, you know, holding equity in their eyes, but it's up to you as the person who's in there to compel their performance. And your best tools are your maxims of law because those can be you can word specific questions to the judge to compel their performance by pointing out that these are the maxims of law and they're not following them.
Exactly. And for folks who haven't even started learning equity, in addition to wielding these maxims as powerful swords, you're just like Aaron said, you're asking all the questions. You know, people talk about wanting to be the creditor, not the debtor. Well, the creditor is the one asking the questions, right? So in in your special appearance, not arguing jurisdiction like they do in some other processes, not arguing, not there to argue anything. And this is kind of, I think, why it's hard for some people to wrap their head around this when they first come into it. But
Well,
you're
especially if
asking,
you're angry, especially if
yeah,
you're getting the shaft from the system and you're
yeah,
really feeling like they're pinching on you, like it's hard not to feel attacked. It's hard not to feel scared. And so when you come into that courtroom, which is already intimidating on its own, and you come in with all that stuff, you yourself are not bringing the equity because you're not in that place where you are there to simply settle the matter and not create more controversy. Because even, I mean, you and I know, like, you think if you're in that state where you're angry or, fear based state, your energy is different and therefore your questions are going to be different. So when you're asking questions, it may, even though you think your wording is good, if it still comes across as arguing or testifying or making claims, then you're not actually in equity. So it definitely understanding, all of the pieces and the components to it, how to stay in equity, that is a huge piece and importance of the learning and the mental state and the energy state that you're in plays a huge part in that.
exactly. And I've listened to a lot of these. I've already had a chance to listen to some of the other folks who in our mentorship circle who have been bringing equity to the court, like listening to parts of their hearings. And I'll tell you what, even a small amount of equity, you've got the judge, the judge is just, you basically caught them off guard, you
Mm-hmm.
know, like you're putting the judge on the back foot. Again, it's not meant to be adversarial, but you're taking back your power, right? And just imagine how you can do it as you master that. You're just like, I'm there just to help. The reason there's no controversy is it's just accounting. We're just there to help them settle the account. That's all.
And that's what I think, when I first started learning, especially the etymology of words and
Yeah.
just how they distort the words by what we learn in the schooling system from a Merriam-Webster dictionary versus what they use against us in court in the Black's Law Dictionary. I mean, I remember coming across a few things where the definitions were actually completely opposite, you know, and so the wording is very specific, intention is very specific. I can't remember where I
Yeah.
was going with this now. I kind of lost my train of thought, but um, you know, definitely getting back to the root and source material for all this stuff is super important. And knowing what it is that you're saying, why you're saying it, all that stuff is very important instead of just like templates or scripts or something like that. I mean, you have to be able to know what you're doing, so when there's any interaction, you know how to respond to that in order to be able to remain in equity and not get caught up in their jurisdiction, because that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to recontract. They're trying to establish jurisdiction to keep you in there, because the courts, this is where I was going with this, because the courts are designed to create controversy. The court system is designed to make money. So, it's all a commercial system. The judge, if you look up the definition of judge, I believe somewhere in there talks about being a banker. Um, so, when you look at that, it's a banking system. So when we go in there, we're just asking them to take care of the accounting that, you know, they're already doing. We're just dealing with it in a different way than what, we would normally be paying with our Federal Reserve notes or with charges attached to your physical body, which you get released after you get released from prison. We're just choosing to deal with it in a different way so that we're stepping out of that system and staying over here as the living sentient moral being and just saying like, okay, you gave us permission to use our signature to create money. That's what we're going to do. And, thanks. Can you just do the banking? Like that's kind of the approach, right?
Exactly. And look, all slavery is by consent because that's natural law. And
Mm-hmm.
in a way, what I like to think about the system is it's kind of like a shit test. Okay, everybody's heard of a shit
Definitely.
test, guys going out on a date or trying to meet a girl, and she's going to kind of give him a hard time and maybe even try to put him down or insult him because she's just trying to test his character. Like, is he really the man that he's demonstrating, or is he completely full of shit? right? So that's a shit test. So I think of all this as like a shit test kind of to us as men and women to say, okay, systems like saying, okay, you want to truly be free, you want to truly be sovereign. Well, demonstrate it. Demonstrate that you're
Yeah,
able to
totally.
rise above the controversy. Like we'll create controversy for you if that's what you want to feed into, because we can just make money off of that all day long. Or here's another way, you can use the same system and just opt out of it and just stay in honor.
Yeah,
So it's pretty amazing. I That's why I don't get bent out of shape about any of this. I mean, I know that real stuff is at risk, people's freedom is at risk if they don't do it right. And that's why I'm such a strong advocate that, you want to deepen your study, not just in equity, but natural law and just going deeper into these principles. And a lot of it is psychology. It's pretty much all psychology. So this I this next one I'll answer this one first, if that's okay with you, Aaron.
sure.
Okay. The idea of equity has been blown out of proportion and given way too much importance in the sovereignty movement. You guys probably know my opinion on this. Can't really hide it. Look, I mean, it's just an opinion. That's Brandon's opinion. So my opinion is it's the exact opposite. It's an idea or a concept whose time has come. Um, but I mean, I could also make an opinion. I mean, how does it have to go fast, go slow? I think it's something that, yeah, the time is right, and when it's really individual. When you're ready to receive it, it'll be ready for you. If you're not, I mean, it won't be. So, I mean, it's almost irrelevant whether it's you know out of proportion or not in the movement. It's just like it's going to be for for he or she who for whom is ready. Like they say, when the student is ready, the teaching will appear. So that's kind of how I look at it. Um, I wouldn't dissuade people from learning it. I mean, Brandon may have a different audience than we do, but I wouldn't specifically dissuade people like it's not worth looking into. But I don't know if I'd say it's out of proportion. What do you think, Aaron?
Well, I mean, I believe it's a movement. I think it's something that's needed. I think the more people that are learning equity and are able to stand in it under their God-given rights, I do think that, it is a movement, and the more people are going to see success with this, then it's just going to be this, it's just going to get bigger and bigger, in my opinion. I mean, even David, I mean, look at even just on your platform alone, since we've really started talking about equity and, helping people see sort of like the difference between processes and, other processes, and how they might, kind of correct that stuff, or change that stuff and then move over into equity, showing them that, there is a remedy at the end of it. Um, I do think that more and more people are going to get on board with this. I just think it's what's naturally going to happen. It protects us. It gives us rights that, they try to take away. And ultimately, I mean, isn't that what this is about? If you're part of the sovereignty movement, we're looking for those things that are helping us to stay out of the clutches of that system.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And it is and will continue to be grassroots in many ways. So, I mean, we could talk about it publicly and get people's interest, but the actual growth is, like I said, is going to require that commitment. So the movement, so to speak, that's actually bringing equity is always going to be, I think, well, I don't even want, I mean, it's just going to be my opinion. I mean, I think it is growing and it's something that can make a big difference. And it's not the only way to look at things, but it's worth taking a look if you're someone like me that just wants to do great things in life and just kind of not, be left alone, not have to deal with all that in the public, except as you choose to, then I would think you would definitely want to look at it. And it's not only not going to be out of proportion, it's going to be, the perfect thing to consider in your toolkit moving forward. So that's how I would look at that one.
Definitely.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I mean, so Great perspectives here, just different, different ways of looking at it. This next one is more, he's expressing more his opinion about how it should be used. So he said, again, we're just interpreting what he said. So if you guys want to go watch the original video, we may not have interpreted it correctly, but equity should be tucked away as a small, specific concept, used only when needed and not treated like a magic solution to everything. So, are you cool if I take a stab at that one first?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's an opinion, but like any opinion, it depends on who you're talking to. And but if we were making if it's a categorical statement, it's actually the opposite. I mean, equity is an extremely powerful tool. And look, I mean, you can invoke equity in any courts. It's not necessarily going to be easy to do that, but when you know how legal jurisdictions work, and I know Brandon talks a lot about the legal jurisdictions, so they're basically layers. So you have the commercial, which comes from apparently from Roman law. It's statutory. It's very rigid. It's all about control. From a
And
mindset
people.
perspective, it's all about controlling everything, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, they got to control everything. So that's statutory. Then you have common law, which for the commoner, as Sovereign Pete likes to say, but it's certainly a step up from statutory because it's more just about being fair, but it mostly has to do with property contracts and property damages and so forth. And it's somewhat rigid. And then you have equity that came along on top of that. Equity is all about doing the right thing. It's all about fairness, very close to natural law. Just don't do harm. Try to find the fairest, most just outcome to situations, even if you have to create a remedy, because that's what equity can literally create a remedy if one doesn't exist. Like you can't really do that. So to say it should be tucked away as a small specific concept, I mean, that's kind of demeaning to the tremendous value and power that equity has. So again, it's just like, I don't know who's speaking to in this video, but um, I wouldn't necessarily be a cheerleader for it, but it'd be more like, hey, if you're sick and tired of banging your head against the wall and just can't seem to get break free, you may want to take a look at this. So, Aaron, what do you think?
Don't even think I could add to that. I think that, yeah, what you've said is exactly right. It's not a small
Amazing.
concept. It's definitely
Not definitely
worth
not.
looking into. Yeah. And I think one of the things that really led me down this path after 2020, I really just especially being in Canada too, with everything going on here with the censorship and stuff. I mean, it's next level. But I just kept on asking to be shown the truth. Like, just show me the path of truth. Like, open up the pathway to truth. And I mean, it's one of those things where, be careful what you wish for because
Yep.
you do get what you ask for, right? So with that came a lot of needing to clear out a whole bunch of my own beliefs and just other stuff. But I mean, when you're asking for truth and you're walking, you're learning, and then this comes along and then you realize like the incredible power that it has, and like I said to you, I watched that video and I was like, I didn't know whether to laugh or be totally insulted, but I was kind of like, I mean, I appreciated his sense of humor. Like, like I definitely appreciate that. I kind of have a trucker mouth myself, so I can appreciate that. I don't get offended, but I was kind of like, because I am aware of there being so many people that follow him and, are using his systems, they're also taking to heart what he's saying. And I think that by totally disregarding equity as a small, insignificant thing is doing a huge disservice to people that are actually looking for, all the options in order to be able to remain as sovereign as possible.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And maybe he's talking only to the permanently lazy. I mean, who
Yeah.
knows? People that just aren't capable of upgrading their consciousness. I mean, we can't entirely take that out of possibility. But I love that you talked about like you know, asking the good questions and the answers appearing. I've had that same experience that you described, Aaron, in my own way. Like every time I was seeking to know, like, how are they getting away with that, or why is there so much debt slavery, or whatever, what are the deeper truths going on here? Like whatever. questions I would pose if they were genuine, answers just started showing up. Not necessarily like instantaneously, but like over a period of weeks. And it's just like content would suddenly appear in my YouTube feed or someone would make a
It
comment.
unfolds. It's
Yeah.
like unfolds for you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So everything appears in the right time, and the key is just to not suddenly become unteachable, like or have a low teachability just because you've learned a few things.
Yeah.
Awesome. So yeah, great stuff. The next one, okay. Well, those who follow Brandon's work know that he's kind of got he's kind of got a foul mouth, so to speak. I mean, he likes to swear a lot and use a lot of colorful imagery, shall we say? So this people may appreciate the humor in this one. So uh, he basically characterized equity kind of like a fleshlight, which is basically something without being too explicit. It's something people use to pleasure themselves, to feel good. Some people use it. I haven't.
So I have to just
Never,
give you a
I've
little
never used a
story.
fleshlight before. I don't know if that's
So,
a good or a
well,
bad thing, but
neither have I. Okay. So, I mean, I would need different mechanical parts in order to be able to appreciate one of those. But I must give you a little bit of backstory because I have two kids, one's 15 and one's 20,
yeah,
and I'm listening to these videos, right? And my son is learning this stuff as I learn it, right?
yeah,
And of course,
right?
now I have to explain what a flashlight is to my 15-year-old that's watching this thing with me. And I was like, oh gosh, that wasn't the best moment ever. Like it's one of these la,
Exactly.
la, la, but
It's so funny. Yeah, we got to, we got to have a good sense of humor too. I mean, it can't be all serious, but the truth is, so if we just reading between the lines here, like equity is just like a feel good, almost like a feel good drug or something, that you just get your dopamine. I mean, again, you can feel really good when you properly bring equity, and I've had some really great experiences personally, and kind of secondarily through other people's success. But it's definitely, I mean, it's the opposite. It's like it's a little bit, it's challenging in the beginning. It's not super fun when you're just starting to learn it. And I think one of the things that makes it least fun is again, for a lot of people, you got to give up any semblance of like, oh, I've got to fight the system. I've got to be in the adversary. I've got to be the
well, and
opponent.
it
Yeah.
can be very stressful for people that are
Yeah.
looking at, certain consequences. And so I would say, if anything, there's more of a level of discomfort with it as you're going
Yeah.
through the learning process, especially if you're in some sort of situation where you're having to immediately deal with something and trying to learn the equity at the same time as you're actively trying to use it. I mean, I was grateful that I was able to learn this stuff and I wasn't having to deal with any, specific issue. I just don't, I wasn't a thing that I had to worry about. But, a lot of times people do get in situations where they're having to deal with it. And it's kind of like they're learning it as fast as possible because it's an emergency situation.
Yeah.
And so I would say that it would be the opposite for them. I would imagine it would be very uncomfortable, very stressful, losing sleep, like all sorts of things. So there's no comfort in that.
Sure. And we've seen that
Yeah,
firsthand. We've seen some of the folks that we've been helping and
definitely.
people in network struggling with a lot of those things. And yeah, I mean, you're going to feel great. It's going to be very pleasurable when you walk out of the court having properly brought equity, having stood in your special appearance, not introducing any controversy, not making any statements. I mean, once you achieve that level of competence, yeah, I mean, then it's going to be probably very pleasurable. You're going to feel really good about yourself, and you will have earned that good feeling. Like it's not just going to be like a hit of dopamine. I mean, you will have actually earned feeling good in that moment. So yeah, I mean, I completely disagree with that characterization. Again, there's probably a small subset of people that are just looking for quick fixes and just fixating on an idea somehow makes them feel good, but I don't think that's the intended audience for this.
Yeah.
All right. Equity is a distraction for people who are insecure or lazy and don't want to engage in actual legal processes. This is a
That,
fun one. Aaron, I'm going to let you go first on this one.
well, okay, one, I think I'm the opposite of lazy. I mean, I can be lazy, don't get me wrong. Um, Oh, there's just so much loaded in that. The only thing I can just say
Take
is
your
that
time. Take
that
your
to me
time.
is just, just pretty much the complete opposite of what is actually true. I'm just going to leave it at that.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things we can, so reading between the lines again, we know that Brandon's very, very much a proponent of litigation. I mean, that's no secret. He's set up a website for it. He's filed a number of cases. So, I mean, that's all public knowledge. And he's obviously got a strong vested interest in that and apparently teaching it. The beautiful thing
Can,
about equity, well, and the thing that Brandon may have an issue with is equity takes away all of that because there is no filing in equity at all,
yeah, there is
not
no
even a little
filing.
bit.
And, I mean, there's a couple things he mentions too about, um, like certain things you need a bar attorney for, and
Yeah,
like I mean, there's lots of comments that he makes about certain aspects of equity, which he says I could be wrong, but he's making very pointed statements, and he is wrong, and so you're kind of like, when you're listening to these things and you're looking at that person as a teacher, and you're trying to get the information from them, and it's not coming across with actual factual information, that can be very harmful for people. One of the points that he made too was he was talking about how on his website he gives you all the documents and that kind of stuff. He's handwritten them himself, and he's saying if
yeah,
your guru, is what he calls it, if your guru isn't giving you like, let's say, templates or like documents that they've written or whatever, then they're not a good guru, is kind of what he's saying. But I would go to sort of suggest maybe the opposite, because if you're the whole concept of fishing for someone versus teaching them how to fish and then they can eat forever, right? This is one of those
exactly.
things where, I mean, you and I both know, we don't do templates. Our mentor doesn't use templates. And the reason for that is because each situation is very individual. And if you start giving people templates, I mean, you've seen this, David, I've seen this. Like, you give them one little piece of information for something and they run with it. They don't even know what they're supposed to be doing, and they think that it's their instant solution, and they make up the answer. So I would say that, as far as that point goes, people not offering, free templates and stuff like that, I would suggest that that's actually probably ideal, because then it's actually forcing you to learn the information for yourself, and therefore have the ability to write your notices, write, have your correspondence in whatever way you're choosing to do it, but you're doing it from a place of you knowing and not giving your power up to someone else. Because I mean, we've seen this too with, people get these trust indentures written, or they do an
Yeah.
SPC process where they've got paperwork. They have no idea what any of this stuff means, and they're sending it off, and they're mailing it, and it's like, and so, it's great. It does make it easier for a person who's trying to learn something. But if you're if you're trying to actually learn it well enough to know how to stand in it in a court situation, this is not something that you can just that someone can just hand you that and you're going to be okay. Like, you need to really learn it. I mean, you and I know we do court role playing with people, because when they're going to get into that situation, you can't read from a template. Like, there's no template that's going to help you when you're standing in front of that judge going back and forth. Like, there just isn't. So I just wanted to point that out, because that was something else that kind of came into my mind when I was thinking about just offering up all the templates or things on websites for free. I don't agree with that either.
Yeah, and in some ways, this is a fork in the road. I mean, life is made of choices, right? And this is a choice that we have. So the choice is, do you want to pursue the path of litigation? Do you want to just kind of fully immerse yourself into that commercial realm? And do you feel like that's, you know, in the throes of, again, highly regulated, highly structured, almost like a Borg, coming from ancient Roman law, statutory? Do you feel like that's where the real, you know, remedy is or do you think, admittedly, like I do, probably Aaron, you as well, and and a growing number of people, do you feel like there's got to be a better way? There's got to be a more natural, more kind of, for mankind kind of way
Well, and again, it comes
to
down to
do
the
it.
the fairness, the
Yeah.
fairness and the justice and what's right. I mean, that's why equity came about, was because
Yeah.
common law fell short of offering a remedy in all situations, because it would be like, oh, this is this is what happened here. That's the, the case history. Boom, that's what we do
Yeah,
every time, right? And so, yeah, veering away from that and getting into the jurisdiction which offers you, you know, an opportunity to have what is just and fair and right, depending on what the situation is.
exactly, exactly. So really it boils down to a choice. We're faced with these, powerful choices in life, and depending on the direction we go, it's going to really map out. It's going to really be have a profound impact on the rest of our lives. So I would just say choose wisely. If you're, but again, that's why I keep asking people like, what do you actually want in life? Like, do you
I
just want
do
to,
ask
do you
people
want to be
that.
left alone?
Yeah.
Do you want to, maybe you came here to do something great. Maybe you came here to be a great artist, a great movie creator, a movie producer, a musician. Maybe you came here to become an educator, kind of like I am, and you are, Aaron, or a combination of things. I mean, I love doing business too. So maybe there's a couple of different projects. I mean, wouldn't you rather spend all your time on that? And if there's a
Mhm.
way for you and many other people to just get out from under the legal system for even criminal charges, much less civil, and just get on with life. I mean, if that was even a possibility, wouldn't you even, wouldn't it be worth at least taking a look at it? I mean, that's kind of how I look at it. I mean, you may decide it's not for you, but um, just to go back to what he said, you are not lazy or insecure just because you decide you don't want to litigate. I mean, that's complete nonsense. That is complete nonsense, to make that kind of statement.
Well,
Um,
and I mean, and
yeah,
even too, like he was, there was some reference, I can't remember exactly what he
yeah,
said, but he was talking about trusts and how you can only go into the court system with a bar card holding attorney if you wanted to represent a trust, and that's actually incorrect as well. So,
yeah.
I mean, the definition of the word attorney means to atone for the dead. And if I'm showing up in court, I don't know about you, but I'm not dead. So, you know, I don't need an attorney to atone for me. I'm not representing myself because I'm not representing anything. I'm not there as the fiction. So when you do start to understand exactly who you are and how you interact with that system, that makes a huge difference. And you don't need statutes, you don't need codes. And I mean, we learned even court customs, a particular court can have customs that we have no knowledge of. And then those court customs are in play when you're in that courtroom and you don't know what those are. So I mean, you're stepping into a game that you never got the rules to, is basically what I look at it as. So why would I want to participate in that? I don't want to. I gotta stay out of it.
Amazing. Amazing. Aaron, do we have time to go through a few more? I know you may have had a time constraint.
Yeah, if you can we just pause this for 1 second?
All right, we're back from a break, having some fun here. Are you having fun, Aaron?
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Good stuff. Yeah, it doesn't have to be all serious. Just goes to show. I mean, we can have kind of like a non-debate debate, as it were, like a proper discussion of ideas. Um, obviously draw a contrast, and all while having fun. I think that's really important. And I also want to say, Aaron, I'll take a moment before we dive back in, just to express my appreciation for all the hard work you've been doing with the Freedom Studio. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, I've enjoyed it. Definitely.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I'm skipping over a few of them because some of them are kind of repetitive. I feel like we've already addressed it. I'm just trying to find the ones that are um, maybe distinct from what we've already talked about.
I could bring up something just while you're looking at that. One of the
Sure, go
points that
ahead.
he made in the video, he just barely touched on rescission, if you remember him commenting on that. And I think his comment was, why would you want to do that? And, when you understand what rescission is, not rescind, but rescission, when you understand what that is and you understand that you have an equitable right rescission, that does allow you the option for different opportunities. So, you know, I'm going to say that when he made that statement, he doesn't know what a rescission is, or what it means, or how it is helpful in certain situations. If you're wanting to undo certain contracts, it's definitely a very powerful tool. And the other thing to mention that goes along with the rescission is the word repentance. And again, there's a spiritual component or a biblical component to the word repent. And it is also important to understand how that comes into play when you're wanting to stay in honor and you're wanting to use equity as your remedy. So those are just 2 points that I kind of had thought about this morning.
Yeah, and even from a psychological, spiritual, just everyday perspective, nothing wrong with apologizing or taking a different direction. In fact, one of the strongest signs of a man, or a solid man or woman, is the ability to utter three words: "I was wrong," right? To sometimes admit that you maybe did something, you're like, well, there's a better way to do this, so I need to take a whole new direction. In fact, isn't there an equity maxim about retracing one's steps? I can't remember the exact wording, Aaron.
Um,
It's better to retrace
there
one's
is
steps than to continue down a bad path, basically.
improperly or something like that. Yes, there is definitely a max.
Isn't that true? I guess that's a question for you who's watching or listening. I mean, have you not found in your own life that there are times when it's better to just say, well, this is not really the best path. It's time for me to take a whole different direction here.
Yeah, I made a
So,
mistake. I've changed my
yeah.
mind. I've learned something new. I need to go a different way. Yeah.
Yeah, but to your point, Aaron, when we talk about repentance in equity, it's not meant to be a religious term. It's simply saying, I did a certain process and I want to just essentially apologize or just say, I'm undoing that. That's the rescission part, of course, which is very powerful, like you said, because rescission can unmake any signature, no matter how long ago it was made. And that's equitable rescission, not commercial rescission. Most people are used to commercial rescission, where you basically have to beg the court to allow you to undo a contract, and they probably only give you 3 days to do it. So it's a whole different animal.
Yeah, definitely.
And again, I know I've said this before, but we're just summarizing what we understood from the video. So don't take our word for it. Go back and watch the original video. If you're not sure if we interpreted it correctly, maybe you'll hear something different. But the next thing I think he did in the video is he kind of talked about a couple of the historical foundations. Like he mentioned that equity follows the law, which is actually a maxim. And he was kind of interpreting it like that means it doesn't override it. I mean, we could argue what law means in this case. I mean, is statute really law? I
Well,
mean,
and
there's,
that's one of the
yeah,
points I was going to make, because he
yeah,
uses the word law, and what he's a lot of times when he's using the word law, he's actually referring to the legal statutes and commercial codes and stuff like that, which is, to me, it's in the legal system, not in the lawful system. But those words are used interchangeably, so discretion.
yeah.
and, and
So it
and
would
and your
be,
Black's Law dictionary out and look what those words mean is helpful.
yeah. In other words, the maxim is not equity. Equity follows the statute. In fact, there's another maxim of equity that equity will not allow a statute to be a cloak for fraud. So in that regard, equity can always override a statute if it's determined that the statute is being used to conceal a fraud or some kind of deception or, some kind of inequitable outcome.
Definitely, yeah.
The next point that he brought up was just this is true that in modern courts, everything's been merged
That
for
is
the
true.
most
Yeah.
part. So that
Hmm.
that is true. And I think he's saying that because he wants to build on top of that later. And then he also talked about how equity was created to kind of soften the edges of common law or address certain deficiencies in common law, which I think is also largely true,
Hmm.
right? And but then he qualified that by saying it's not superior to law. Again, when you look at the layers of jurisdictions, you
Yeah.
have statute, which is really low. So
Mhm.
maritime admiralty commercial law, the modern version of law merchant and the UCC or Bill of Exchange. That's very low because it pretty much only applies to man-created entities like corporations and persons.
Yeah.
Then you have common law, which now is better because it's applying to people, but it's, not the highest. And then you have equity, which came to address deficiencies in common law. So we know if it was created to address deficiencies, it's obviously a more advanced and therefore
Superior.
more superior form of law or legal jurisdiction,
Well,
right?
and do you think like so when he started to talk about that and it being merged and he there was some reference to like about he was talking about the chancery courts and he talked about the four states in the US that still have chancery courts and when I first started learning from my first teacher, which I'm grateful that I never actually continued with her because I feel like she would have been sending me down a very wrong path. Learning lesson, as many people in this movement have, paid money for services, not gotten the results they wanted, and that kind of stuff. But when I was first learning, she did a lot of referencing about needing to get into chancery, needing to get an
Yeah.
in camera hearing, and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, and there are still people out there that are saying that that's what you need to do, but I would argue that you don't need to do that because if you know how to ask the questions, and if you look at the root word of that as the king, you're asking the questions, that's what allows you to remain in equity, and you don't need to go to a side room. The robe doesn't need to come off, you know what I mean? Like that's an old concept, and I think if I and you can correct me if I'm wrong, David, but I believe that comes from a pre 1933 concept of equity. But I'd have to go back and research that specifically, but it's not required now in order to be able to go into that courtroom and remain in the jurisdiction of equity jurisprudence. It's not required. There's misconceptions about that.
Yeah, so it is true that there are specifically chancery courts, and it's also simultaneously true that you can bring equity to any court, but obviously you need to know how to embody the spirit of equity in order to properly bring it so that you speak, the way you ask your questions is actually bringing equity and not just recontracting with the court. So it's a little bit tricky, but it is definitely possible to bring equity to any court.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I think what he was doing is he was kind of mentioning some of the history in order to build up a point. So I'll tackle this one next. He said basically, I think his next point is because of all this history that we just talked about, like how equity came about, people use that history to justify all kinds of delusional beliefs about private, quote unquote, remedies and, quote, secret justice. Okay. So, in
Mhm.
other words, people are kind of latching on all that, what we just said, in order to believe, I guess, that there's some kind of secret justice, if we want to just simplify it. Um, So my thinking is, well, first of all, there's definitely a secrecy around equity. I mean, it's kind of like a well-kept secret. I mean, I didn't find about it until very recently, and even after studying a lot of this material. So, I mean, it is objectively true that it's held very closely, and I think for good reason. I think it's honestly just like any study, just like even natural law, a deep study of natural law, it's ready when you're ready for it. So it's not a matter of, being locked in a box like you can't access it, that kind of secret. It's more just you're not even going to notice it. You're not even going to recognize it until you're ready to. But as far as calling it a delusional belief, I mean, again, I'm not a religious guy. Knowledge is superior to belief in my book every day of the week. And it really has nothing to do with beliefs. And you shouldn't believe anything. I mean, you can believe in yourself, of course. You can believe that you can learn. Those things are important. If you want to have faith in your abilities, that's great. But you should really, in my opinion, it's just my opinion, but I think you should focus on obtaining proper knowledge so that you can act wisely. That's really the only way to address any matter. And so it almost feels like a lot of the statements are just to kind of discourage people from studying equity. And I would say again, if you're ready for it, it's going to be ready for you. So that's kind of how I look at it. Aaron, what are your thoughts?
Well, and definitely, I agree. I mean, I actively encourage people to learn equity. I think it's very important. Um, yeah, I mean, there in all of the things that I've seen, and especially since learning equity, I really, I really don't really understand why anyone would choose a different route. And that's just me. Obviously, I have you know, my own opinions on this, but the more like when we were working with people and the more things that I'm exposed to when people are bringing equity and then more exposure to people that are, using different processes and seeing, harsh results from that. I would definitely encourage people to take this path and learn this if it's something, that they feel compelled to do. And just as far as your comment about belief goes, I mean, I'm a hypnotherapist, so obviously beliefs play a large part into when I'm working with people. And I will often offer to people there's a difference between an absolute truth and a relative truth. So, an absolute truth would be something that is true for every single person, it is not disputable. And a relative truth is something that is only true for you, and beliefs fall into that category. So, if it's not something that's true for every single person across the board, then it doesn't have to be true for you because it's just a belief and it's not a truth. And so, like with our mentor, we're constantly being encouraged to go back to original source material, learn the definitions, like understand, commercial and or sorry, contracts, understand negotiable instruments, so that you come into this not with beliefs, but with knowledge and truth. And I think that there's a real importance in understanding the difference between the two.
Absolutely. Very well said. Very well said. And you can see it's, I mean, we just keep reinforcing over and over again this idea of being committed to study because it's going to take an effort to learn this stuff.
Definitely.
Okay, well, this next one is going to be a big one. I'm going to let you go first, but I'm definitely going to have a lot to say about this one.
Okay.
I'm definitely have some choice words. I'm not going to swear or anything. Not going to take
Okay.
any oaths or, become suddenly foul-mouthed, but yeah, I'm going to definitely have some
Okay.
stuff to say. So,
All right, hit me. What is it? What's the next statement?
so the next statement, as we understood, is giving judges too much power under the banner of equity is a mistake. Everything ought to be tightly bound by statutory law.
Well, so where I don't even know where to begin with this one. Yes, you are looking at the judge for their judgment, right? When you're in that court situation. But because the difference between a judge and a jury, and I just want to clarify something. So I learned this: a jury is actually supposed to be a jury of your peers, the people that that can attest to your personality and like your traits, your history, that kind of stuff. So when we refer to a jury, it's actually not what it was originally intended. These are 12 people who do not know you at all. So the original concept of a jury has already been distorted. But when you're looking to
Good point.
people who are just you know your regular Joe Blows that are being called in for jury duty, probably don't want to be there in the first place. They've never taken the oaths like the judges do. When you start to get into those systems, I mean, how many oaths does a judge take? How many oaths does a lawyer take before they can even service you? So they work for three different people before they work for you. But because they do have oaths that they've taken, the judge specifically, they have to follow those rules in that commercial system. Otherwise, they go into we called commercial dishonor. And if they're not acting in honor, we can compel their performance to do what is fair and just and right by, even simply by saying, Your Honor, does the record reflect that I'm asking if this court holds equity in their eyes? Like, there are certain things that you can do with a judge that you're very limited to when you're dealing with a jury. And so that would be my take on it. And in some ways, you know, you could have a judge that's really difficult. I mean, we've seen this, right? Like just super difficult judges. And then there's other ones where, they'll say things like, Thanks for bringing honor to my court. This case is dismissed. Or, they'll come up with some reason why it's dropped or whatever it might be. But when you're looking at that, you're coming into it as that person, as a living being, and you're a living being, and you're asking them to remain in honor, and you're honoring their court system. If done correctly, they do have the obligation to offer you the remedy, because you're not in a commercial dishonor, unless you've done a bunch of stuff and you need to rescission it and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, so I would argue that actually standing in front of a judge, you're likely to get better results because of the oaths they've taken and the understanding of the commercial system, and knowing that it all has to do with money running in the background, bonds, and all that kind of stuff. Whereas your common living individual is not privy to that information, and so therefore is less likely to be held to a higher standard. That's my thoughts on that one.
Excellent. And set some great insights about the jury, which I didn't even remember what you said about the jury of your peers. And I know that I've heard that before. And that's it. That's an important distinction right there. So um, the way I looked at this one, I actually uncoupled the two clauses because to me they stand alone. Like it's almost like they're two different things that, I mean, I guess you could construe them together, but I like to respond to them separately. So I'm looking at the statement, everything ought to be tightly bound by statutory law. I'm looking at that by itself because that's a standalone statement.
Sure. Yep.
So let's think about that. So everything ought to be tightly bound by statutory law. So what is statutory law? I mean, if we're just cutting out all the bullshit and just calling things as they are, it's restriction, it's control of behavior, it's behavioral control, right? And if
Man-made.
you, yeah, man-made behavioral control, which is designed to create the maximum amount of limitation of people's behavior while still giving them the illusion of some level of freedom,
Yeah, I would agree with that
right?
for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
And we can get into all the history and the Roman law and where it came from and la-di-da. I don't think that's important in context. To me, what's important is the spirit and substance of the statement. So there's a maximum in equity. Equity looks to the substance and not to the form. So to me, the substance of the statement is advocating control, like more control. So my question would be in a world where things are already getting locked down more and more, and if you're someone, you meaning you who's listening to me, if you're someone who desires more freedom, do you want more control or do you feel that freedom means less control? Again, not to the point where we're violating natural law, which is very simple. Don't harm others, don't steal their shit. That's pretty much it.
Definitely.
Like just respecting a few basic rules, maybe a few basic customs, and then everything else is, based on agreement, which statutory is also, based on consent, obviously. Um,
It's
it's
just
just the
usually without your
manufactured consent.
consideration. It's
Yeah.
usually without your consideration. Yeah.
Yeah. Manufactured
Adhesion
consent
contracts and all
or
the rest
yeah.
of it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So if you are an advocate for freedom or what I like to call a freedom activist, and that's what we call our entry level membership, a freedom activist. If you're a freedom activist like me, or like anyone, do you really think there should be more control? Or do you think we should find a way to be more in harmony with natural law and just respect those few rules that are in play? That would be the question that I would want to ask.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. And then as far as the first part of that clause, giving judges too much power under the ban of equity is a mistake, meaning it's the wrong thing to do. Well, too much is very subjective. I guess if we want to nitpick, what does that really mean? The judge has exactly the power they need. They have the power to effect the discharge, to fully close the account. They're just waiting for you to demonstrate that you know what's going on. And then, you guys work together to close the account. So I, I wouldn't categorically, say judges are given too much control. Could they be sometimes? Sure. Absolutely anything's possible. But, making a categorical statement to me it just doesn't sit right with me. The next thing we understood was kind of similar to what I just said. Judges should be, quote, tied down by statutes, not free to do whatever they want. Again, just these broad statements, which is what happens under broad equity principles. So he's arguing that judges are too free under equity, which you could extrapolate from that to mean that everybody's too free under equity. I mean, if judges are too free, then judges are people just like you and I. I mean, does that mean we're all too free? So I'm not really sure what the spirit of that is. I mean, again, I go back to the question I just asked before, do we really need more control? What do you think, Aaron?
Well, I definitely am not looking for more control. No. Um, and I think, oh gosh, I just had a point that was like on the top of my head, um, about judges. Oh, I totally lost it. It's hopefully it'll come back to me. But no, I definitely think, if you're looking at becoming more and more sovereign and freeing yourself from more of the, clutches of the system, needing to follow, more statutes, more codes, having a judge that's going to follow more statutes, more codes. I mean, you know, a person could offer that, but then, I would offer, when a person's making claims like that, how well is it working for them in court? And this is what I keep going back to is what's your end results? Because from what I've understood, I don't believe that he didn't have success with his Amex case. I mean, I'm positive if he'd had like some significant wins, we would hear about it. So, is what he's suggesting to people to do, is it really working for him or others?
That's a really good point. Yeah, I mean, we want to see, the results will speak. By their fruits ye shall know them. I mean, ultimately, people can talk a big talk, but really it boils down to the actions and the results that they get from it. So it's an excellent point.
and
Okay,
and
we
even
go
even
ahead.
just going back to that point, I mean, I've seen situations, as I'm sure you have too, where a person, they might think that the process that they've used has worked, only to for 2 years later to all of a sudden get a piece of mail and they're looking at jail time or fraud charges or something like that, impersonating something, or and so I mean, so then, they've gone 2 years thinking that this has worked. How many people have they taught this process to now, and it's not worked for them? Like, so I would encourage, especially if you're going to follow the path of any one process, or following an individual and what they're suggesting, to know that they have the wins and the results that they were looking for, and that's maintained that long term, right? And not just 2 years later, something comes out of the woodwork that you're having to deal with now and you don't know how to do that.
100%. I'll just go to this one last one, which I think was his last point. Again, our interpretation of it. So go watch the original video to make sure that you actually get what he said. People who rely solely on equity are, quote, lazy or, quote, lost because they use it to avoid learning the actual legal system. What are your thoughts on that, Aaron?
Well, I don't really need to learn all the stuff in the legal system in order to remain in equity. So I feel like why would I waste my time and energy and effort doing that when I don't need to? I'd rather spend it learning the stuff that's actually going to help me. That would be my thought.
Very well said. Yeah, another way to say the same thing is if there's two different options to get you, if you have a goal, let's say to have more freedom, to create more freedom in the world, let's say you're presented with two paths. If one is more certain to get you there, then why would you not choose that? And does that make you lazy because you didn't go the other way? Let's say the other way was more busy work. Let's say, the legal system is a lot of busy work, right? Learning a lot of codes. It's very intellectual. You can tell from the way they talk in court, it's like you're all in your left brain. There's no heart in it. That's one of the reasons I think people feel very uncomfortable in the courts is that they're heartless for the most part. I mean, you can bring out the true heart, when you bring equity, but for the most part, it's just an intellectual exercise, just a paper attack, a paper battle.
Yeah, what paper
Yeah,
terrorism, I think, is one
yeah,
one of the comments that I
yeah.
heard one time. I thought that was funny.
So technically, if you're talking about hard work in the sense of doing, spending more hours, memorizing more, et cetera, yeah, I mean, one could argue that it's a lot more work that way. And so comparatively, someone who doesn't do that, I mean, I guess you could say they're lazy.
Yeah, but
But
but I'm not, I
yeah,
wouldn't consider myself lazy because I like to spend
yeah,
that time in my garden or I'm sewing or I'm going out for a walk or you know what I mean? I like to enjoy the time that I have. I would
yeah,
like I feel like there's so many things I want to do with my time that
yeah,
if it gets eaten up by stuff that I don't need to be doing, then why would I bother to do that, you know?
exactly, exactly. So I would just to kind of put a nice button on this because I feel like we've I know, Aaron, what do you think? I feel like we've had a great discussion about this and really kind of brought forward some great ideas. What do you
Yeah,
think?
and I think it will give, I think it will give people you know, people who don't have a basis of understanding, that
Yeah.
maybe heard that video, it'll help them understand, clarify a few things, and one would hope that, you know, especially because, Brennan Joe Williams is very much out there. He's very much known about, people follow him. I would encourage him to learn more of this because he might be seeing some more successes in what he's doing and the route that he's choosing to go if he's adding this into his repertoire of knowledge because I mean he does know a lot of information about the UCC and the filings and court proceedings and things like that, but it's kind of like the more tools you have in your tool belt, you know the more well-rounded you are as far as education, and then also being able to teach that stuff to other people who are obviously very much there's a you know large amount of people that are trying to seek remedy for different things that they're dealing with.
Exactly. There's also the sunk cost fallacy. Are you familiar with that, Aaron?
No, I haven't. I don't think so. Share.
So the sunk cost fallacy is this idea that if you've invested so much time, so much energy,
Mm.
so many resources into a strategy or an outcome, that you can't, even if you're not getting the results you want, you can't just drop everything because you've already invested so much into it.
Yeah. And what did you say it was called?
The sunk cost fallacy.
The cost fallacy. Yeah. Okay. Yep.
It's called that because it's a logical fallacy, because many times, not maybe not every time, but many times it is actually the better choice to abandon
Right.
and
Yeah.
to retrace one's steps than to continue down a path that's going to lead you, maybe not to the desirable outcome. So what I would suggest to Brandon is if he watches this video, which he may, or anyone who's watching it, who's kind of very invested in that path, I would say that's great. I'm not telling you what to do. You have free will. I'm not telling you what to do. However, I would encourage you to consider that perhaps you are falling for the sunk cost fallacy and you may not be very teachable if you're not open to, a different, even a radically different way of looking at things, right? I would also argue that if we truly want freedom, if we truly desire freedom, it's completely incompatible with more control. That is not what's going to lead us to more freedom. So I would just say that point blank. If you desire more freedom, it's completely incompatible with increasing the level of external control because that would be slavery, right? Whether through consent or otherwise. So, but Brandon or anyone who watches this could say, "Oh, I get it. Like, that's a good way of looking at it. Maybe I can soften my stance a little bit, or maybe not. I mean, it'll be very interesting to see what comes out of that. But I think for the discerning viewer or listener, hopefully we've given you a sense that, you know, what the sovereign does is he or she doesn't immediately jump to a conclusion, doesn't immediately dismiss ideas, but just views them on their merit, views them on their face, evaluates them, considers them carefully, applies the trivium, and then comes to, a rational conclusion. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this conversation that we created today. Awesome, Aaron. I really appreciate the chance to kind of riff with you and bat some
Hmm.
ideas back and forth and have your perspective, which is obviously not, we're not clones of each other. So you're going to have a different perspective
For
and,
sure. Yeah.
but there's good alignment. So awesome. Great
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, David. I appreciate it.
All right, folks. Well, let us know what you think. Comment below the video. What's your perspective on this? Do you think we're completely full of shit, or do you think we brought forth some good ideas? So look forward to hearing from you guys.
If it's going on YouTube, it's probably a little bit of all of it, I would think, right?
Yeah, a little bit of everything,
Yeah,
little bit of a smorgasbord. So
for
thank
sure.
Thanks so much, guys. And for those of you who are members or thinking about joining, we'll look forward to seeing you in an upcoming session. So take care, everyone.